stalls right behind us, so do take a look. And ladies and gentlemen, all our panelists were perfect for this panel on passion through the ages. Thank you, sir. English language poets in the international literary scene. And he has edited important anthologies including the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, World English Poetry, and Modern English Poetry by Younger Indians. And let me also tell you that he's the first Asian to read his poetry and deliver the Derek Walcott Lecture at the Nobel Laureate Festival. Sir, I can see you right there. Why don't you join us up here on the stage? And let me also introduce Dr. Sumita Misra. Well, we're already very well acquainted with her. She's the Festival Director of Literati, and she's also the founder chairperson of the Chandigarh Literary Society. Well, literature is her strong inclination, but she has a career in something which is very, very different. She is an IAS officer of the Haryana cadre, and presently she is working as Joint Secretary in the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, Niti Aayog, New Delhi. Sumita ma'am, we need you to join us up here on the dais. Sumita ma'am, may I request you to come up here on the dais? And in the meantime, while Sumita ma'am joins us, who better than Miss Mandeep Caur to be in conversation with Sudeep sir and Sumita ma'am? Well, Mandeep ma'am, I can see you right there, so why don't you come up? She's a corporate professional and she has been one for almost 20 years. She's a vice president for one of the leading multinational telecom service providers in India. But poetry has always been a part of her life. And let's just put it this way, that poetry is the way she expresses herself, her deepest self, her deepest thoughts, and her book, Living to Winning, is proof of that, because there is poetry about anything and everything in life. And that book, I believe, is also available at the stalls right behind us, so do check them out. And may we have all our panelists on the dais? And Sumita ma'am can be seen walking down, and ma'am, please join us. Mandeep ma'am, over to you.
I'm sorry to break the mold a bit. I'm not going to join them for a little while as a moderator, because from my corporate experience, I'm more used to standing and talking to such huge gathering. So that will give me more confidence. Once I asked an immensely impressive poetess, she was judge of one of the contests I was participating in. I also wrote a few lines so that I always remember what she said. I'm going to recite that to you. When poetry is your muse, when poetry is your muse and mind is fertile, soul unquenched, but dreams virile, you could romance every particle in the universe and create life. Lilting words and thoughts for play. Lilting words and thoughts for play. The seed meets the soil and the verse thus germinates. So ladies and gentlemen, what a lovely on-setting winter afternoon it is. Indeed, the ideal time to soak in the literature and the language play. And to aid the same, we have the honor and privilege of Dr. Sumita Misra and Sudeep staying with us. So I welcome all you guests and the panelists to that elusive, I'll change the name of the title of taking the poetic license, to this elusive poetic flavor and fall in love all over again. Before I start the real conversation with them, since it's about poetry, I would like you to take you through a bit of a trivia about poetry, which even Dr. Bibek, their bride, also touched. Did you know that the poetry as an art form predates written text? When there was no language script, we had the poetry to really share the learnings, the wisdom of the time, the religious scriptures, the laws of the land, the stories of the warriors, and of course the love stories, the chants and the hymns. All of this was spread and cascaded and passed down to the next generations in the form of poetry. That's why all the poetry of the past, if you see, was written in metrical pattern. They were always rhyming in that. Therefore, it was easy to remember, recall, retell, and pass on to the next generations. If you see that our Vedas in thousands BC and Odyssey in 800 BC, even for Punjab, I'm sure all of you would connect that Guru Granth Sahib a few centuries ago has been written in form of poetry, the ragas and shlokas. So such is the importance of poetry in our life. So summarizing, poetry is a verbal art, so it should be more recited and sung more than just written and read. So keeping up to the pattern, today we have orchestrated this befitting tribute to the poetry, and please welcome my honorable guest today, the highbrow August poets, literati, and a lot more you must have heard in their introduction. Let's begin with a real tete-a-tete with them. Thank you. Let's give them a huge round of applause. So just hold your breath. Over to Sudeep.
Good afternoon, Sat Sri Akal, Namaskar. It's always good to be next to the lake because I've walked the length and breadth of this lake many times. There's a colleague and friend of mine called Caur, who's a very fine actress. She's one of the leading actresses of Neelam Mansingh, who's sitting here. Please give her a round of applause because she's, I think, one of the superstars of Indian theatre. Ramanjit has just made this film on 3 of my poems, and I thought it would be a nice way to start. It's a short film, just 5 minutes, so perhaps we can have the film. Let me start with this particular poem which you wanted me to read. It's called Kargil, and I'm reading this partly because there's a lot of people who are in military services. It's a film which it's a poem which I think is very urgent in our present political climate, because it is to do with borders, borderlessness. It's to do with clamping down and the soul trying to free itself from things. But beyond that, the reason I wrote this poem, this was 10 years after the Kargil War, and my son was very young at the time, and he was at a stage when he was playing with plastic guns and bullets. So I did this 2-month trip from Delhi all the way to Leh, Ladakh, to Kulu Manali and back. And Kargil was not part of my itinerary. But he said, Baba, we'll find guns and bullets, so we must go there. So of course, as a father, you don't say no to your child. And of course, 10 years after the war, this was a boring outpost, a dusty town, nothing particularly spectacular. But and he felt really sheepish for taking me there. But at least for artists, there's always something that you find in these spaces, and this is the backdrop of the poem. And it opens with one of the finest world poets, Derek Walcott, who won the Nobel Prize in 1992. And I quote from his poem, a book-length poem, To Apollo's Hound, and I quote, "Our street of smoke and fences, gutters gorged with weed and reeking, scorching iron grooves of rusted galvanize, a dialect forged from burning asphalt, and a sky that moves with thunderhead cumuli, grumbling with rain." 10 years on, I came searching for war signs of the past, expecting remnants, magazine debris, unexploded shells, shrapnels that mark bomb wounds. I came looking for ghosts, people past, skeletons charred, abandoned brick wood cement that once housed them. I could only find whispers among the clamor of a small town outpost in full throttle, everyday chores sketching outward signs of normalcy and life. In that bustle, I spot war lines of a decade ago, though the storylines are kept buried, wrapped in old newsprint. There's order amid uneasiness, the muezzins cry, the monks chant, baritones merging in their separateness. At the bus station, black coughs of exhaust smokescreen everything. The roads meet, and after the crossroad ritual, diverge, skating along the undotted lines of control. A porous garland with cracked beads adorns Tiger Hill. Beyond the mountains are dark memories, and beyond them no one knows. And beyond them no one wants to know. Even the flight of birds that wing over their crests don't know which feathers to down. Chameleon-like they fly, tracing perfect parabolas. I look up and calculate their exact arc and find instead a flawed theorem. Is it working now? Okay. Imagine a poet has to do fillers before the act. After a long concert and after dinner,
It's okay.
I find myself unexpectedly with you. In this new space, finding oneself is wonderful. I was here and not here at the same time. Later, I felt as if of an old familiar novel, a character I knew but had not met in flesh.
I think poetry in the larger context of today and the world, Sudeep will be a better person to answer. And we will ask you the same question too. I think you will understand what I'm saying. But speaking for myself, I think, poetry is essentially something you start writing for yourself more than anyone else. Prose is written per se, I think, for the world, and poetry starts as a journey of a self-expression or self-exploration. And it's an expression of our search for meaning, to express love. Sumita Misra famously said that Viyogi Hoga Pehla Kavi means that the first poem must have been a poem of love and learning. So, but at the same time, poetry is a form of catharsis. But I don't think that is poetry as such, because then it would be extremely self-indulgent, and it would not make sense to any but oneself, because it has to have a wider resonance. While it might begin inward, for a poem that is immortal, it connects across time, across language, cultural context, what have you. And so I think it's a bit like, like a room you pass every day, and then there's this sudden shard of sunlight which lights up an unexpected corner, and you just stop and say, oh yes. And if you're able to capture that moment of suddenness, of being startled by something in the universe, and convey it, I think that would be a poem, really.
So the big honcho has given her thesis. So there's not much. It was more than a thesis. It was PhD twice over. Unlike her, I'm not a big honcho. I just a writer. I write poetry because it compels me. There's nothing else I could possibly do. But what is very, very important is first to dispel the notion that poetry is difficult. A lot of barricades come to poetry because very, very often it's taught very poorly in school and colleges. So often, even in my school, it was left for the last 2 days of the semester, chalo ye bhi kar lo, ye aap padh lo isko. That sort of thing. What we do not realize is poetry is central to civilization. Poetry is central to our living organism. Poetry is more important than breathing itself. And why do I say that? Take any important moment in your life: birth, death, love, heartbreak, illness, disease, marriage, death rituals. It's all celebrated through poetry. We forget that actually. If you tend to have a book next to your bedside table, invariably it'll be a poetry book which will outlast a novel, because you read a novel and it goes onto the shelves or you pass it away. Poetry is very rarely that you give away. You tend to keep it, you own it. And every poem that has been written by whoever it's written, every reader has a kind of personal ownership to the poem. The problem, of course, that's of course the ideal world, the utopian world. The problem, of course, is a lot of poetry, modern poetry, bad name to modern poetry has come because you can write a sentence, chop it up into 5 parts, and these days with fancy laptops and laser printers, you can arrange it in a column, put Garamond Pro 14-point and print it out on 80 GSM paper, and suddenly a really badly written poem visually looks professional. So there's no engagement with craft, with knowledge, with tradition. And what do I mean by tradition? We don't have to be worldly wise. A lot of people, a lot of poets I meet, people I teach, young and old, often older, and they are so confident that it actually makes me feel, well, that's very good that they're confident, but confident about something that is really, really hollow. So if I say, why don't you write a sonnet as an exercise, the response invariably would be that sonnet is not pertaining to our society anymore. It was done in Shakespeare's time. I said, that is not the reason why I'm telling you to write a sonnet. The reason I'm telling you to write a sonnet is it's a very strict form. You have 14 lines to convey an entire novel. Each line has a particular kind of beat, the ascenders and descenders, the iambic pentameter, the high stress and the low stresses. So you're not only writing, but you're controlling your breath, you're controlling your movements. So it's about the craft. So if you do not have the craft, how can you write free verse? Free verse was written by very good poets who were very trained. A rock star who's a very good rock star, or a rap artist is a good rap artist because he or she actually has been trained in classical music more often than not. A modern dancer has been trained in classical music. So how can you break tradition or make a tradition anew if you do not even have the grammar and syntax? So these are things. The grounding is important, and it's not as though someone teaches you, it's actually just self-inflicted. You just have to make sure that the product you're putting out is as well wrought as it's possible. Because what happens is, with social media and all that, which I love, people will write a poem at night before, by midnight it's up on Facebook, in the morning it has 5 likes, the 6th like will be from some obscure person in Turkey, and the comment below is internationally acclaimed poet, and everybody's going rah, 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 rah. And it's worrying, that sort of stuff. I mean, the panel I heard before was, is affirmation and is quality controlled by people with a thumb sign up? No. It's about depth of reading. Poetry, like fiction, like drama, like philosophy, requires a lot of personal, quiet time to digest, to read. Certificates and accolades from strange institutions do not matter at all to serious poets. Actually, all that matters is the text on the page. If it works, if it's solid, if it's pungent, if it's persuasive, if it's emotional.
I guess absolutely correct, Sudeep. I think you just nailed it.
I've paused.
So, but I guess the real poetry, the real great poetry, amidst all of that, which is get lots of thumbs and likes, will really shine out, irrespective. So, coming to Sumitra ma'am now, I think we've heard Sudeep recite his poetry with so much of a visual delight, and we've really thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, I have a request for Sumita Misra. Ma'am, in fact, particularly, I really loved her recent book, Caur, and I ordered it. In fact, I ordered both the books. But you see, even Amazon is scared of the honcho of the administrative world, and her book got delivered just the very next day. So I have it today with me, and I'm going to get it autographed. But before that, I would request her to recite one of her, or a few of her favorite poems from this book. They have deliberately done.
So much for the honcho. In my own Litfest, the mic doesn't work for me. Point to be noted, okay? But Sudeep, I think yours was more than a thesis, and I really enjoyed everything that you said, and I do agree with it. That this is too much the age of instant gratification. We all seem to be suffering from attention deficit disorder. The younger generation even more so. Twitter is what, 140, then there's Insta, then there's...
No, I wouldn't blame the younger generation. I would blame ourselves first.
No, true, I'm not blaming them. I'm saying it is a
parents,
manifest. It is manifest, and we have given them the technology and the lack of options maybe in terms of not enough talk of books, not enough quiet time. But, well, that, be that as it may, I think we can talk about that subsequently. So my latest book, which I'm happy you got, thank you so much, is dedicated to my daughters. And I want to first share, there are a couple of poems in it on my experiences as a woman in public life, and what I see the changing realities of India and the world. And I'm not going to read any gender-based poem. That was a decision I made today, but I am going to read this dedication to them, and then a few lines from a poem which again is dedicated to all daughters. So this is for Arushi and Gurmeher. You bend time. You bend time, your laughter is the cipher, unlocking tomorrow. You are both circularity and singularity, as all children are, I think. You are both circularity and singularity. You are me, born again. You are you, born afresh. May you command universes again, as destined at the start. And thank you. I'm adding to that, I'm just reading a few lines from as I said, one of the other poems on daughters. In today's tribe of my daughters, there is all this, and the touching bewilderment of the young. Summer storms, lightning, and the wetness of rain only they know. Yet I see their ease of faith, as if the future had arrived to stay. I too yearn to believe the same for their lives. But whatever, I know they shall speak stronger. They shall harness the winds better. They will not surrender before the tide turns, as their mothers did not. Yet they will not expend a life over lost causes. They will not battle between being victorious and being good. They will be able to ride the tiger proudly. They will not need to lay siege to a world much larger, the one common to men and women everywhere in all times to come, to find and be oneself.
But my personal favorite that I had from your book was, I would like to recite a few lines of that if you permit me. That was today. Because I wrote a poem like that, but it wasn't as beautiful as she has written on the same subject. It had the spirit of carpe diem. So just seize the moment. Just one more cup to linger over. Just one more cup to linger over. To stroke the innocent, seductive face of the new day, before it grows huge and gobbles me up. Beautiful, isn't it? So turning to Sumit, but Sudeep, the Punjabi me, the Punjabi me. So we had an agreement.
I didn't know that the government has such
no,
a
actually
power.
learned that from you.
Changing my affidavits on stage.
So I first pronounced that Sudeep, so he said, listen, Sudeep. So I correct myself.
Shalgam wali shalgam.
So एक लम्हा, जिंदगी नाम है कुछ लम्हों का, और उनमें भी वही एक लम्हा, जिसमें दो बोलती आंखें चाय की प्याली से जब उठी तो दिल में डूबी, डूब के दिल में कहीं आज तुम कुछ ना कहो, आज मैं कुछ ना कहूँ,
बस यूं ही बैठे रहो हाथ में हाथ लिए, गम की सौगात लिए, गर्मी जज्बात लिए, कौन जाने कि उसी लम्हे में दूर पर्वत पर कहीं बर्फ पिघलने लगे. I can see your eyes light up. This is a beautiful poem, Ek Lamha by Kafi Azmi. And Sudeep has done a wonderful job of translating some of the beautiful poems. This one is one of them. And therefore I would request Sudeep to recite his translation. And why did he choose Kafi Azmi? Because translation is a very, very difficult task. It's not as simple as just picking up a text and translating. It is about preserving the essence of the poetry. It is doing justice to the original artist and the poet. Like Gulzar Sahab once said that I have translated Rabindranath Tagore's poetry and my translation is better than his own poetry. Because as a poet, every time you approach your poem, you keep improvising it. You keep changing it. I do it all the time. You know, I visit my poem and change a few words. But he said, I have translated his original script. And hence it is closer to his Tagore's poetry. Right? So similarly, I would want Sudeep to share how did he do the justice to Kafi Azmi and also recite the poetry in his own words.
You have the English with you? I'll answer the question about translation. Translation, first thing I need to admit is the reason if I have done anything worthwhile in the English language is purely because I have been immersed in Hindi, Urdu and Bangla poetry from my childhood. So Bangla, Hindi and English were all my mother tongues, and I am much, much more enriched as an English language writer because of the rich history and cadences of the languages we grow up around us. That also is not just the point of plurality, but it's also important to say that none of the languages are higher than any other. English is not necessarily important than Hindi or otherwise. They're all at the same level. Each one has its own beauty. But when it comes to languages such as Farsi or Urdu, they are inherently such poetic languages that you have the added responsibility of transcribing the cadence, the texture, the musicality in a way that in the English might not sound as Urdu poetry. Now the reason is often in Urdu poetry or ghazals particularly you have refrains. You repeat the same line over again and again. You have wah wah and so on at the end. If you do that in English poetry, it just sounds very clunky and out of place. So how do you do that in English? So what I did was I would read out the poem to myself aloud many times. I would get an Urdu wala to read it out in their beautiful intonation. And even before I start translating, I would take a white sheet of paper and make a grid, a box. Say it's 14 lines. I would make 14 lines this way. Each line I would map the high and the low beats and the cadences. So it's almost like before even I have translated the poem, I have the entire sound notation on the page. It's like a musical score sheet in Western music. I have the score sheet in front of me, but I haven't even gone to the...
Your books, your babies, a very successful life ahead.